Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Kuf Zion. We are near the top of Kuf Zion. We are on where is it? Third line, fourth line, second line of Kuf Zion Amud Aleph, at the word Itmar. Now, um, we don't really need to go over too much because we're really going to be starting with a new topic, but let's just remind ourselves of the most recent halachic issue that we were addressing. And we won't necessarily say what the halacha is, but we'll go over it. And that is if you have two brothers who are dividing an estate, and then a third brother gets discovered. The question is, do we imagine that the division is a valid division, and then they just break off a piece of each of their property to create the third party's, the third brother's share? That is, of course, the view of Shmuel. And then Rav says, no, you need a brand new division. You can't just divide the situation. And so as a result, it's not sufficient to do that. And so that was the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel. Now we have a related and similar situation, but a little bit different. Now we're going to have, let's take a look, second line, Itmar. So it's been said, Achan Shechalku, you got two brothers. Well, actually, Rashbam notes here, Ha'achan Shechalku. It's 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, about 13th line down in the narrow lines of the Rashbam on Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph. Ha'achan Shechalku, Ubishnei Achan Myri. We're talking about two brothers. Umiyu hu hadin legimel, but the same law will apply for three. So we'll stick with Rashbam and we'll say we've got two brothers that divided an estate. Uvav al hakov, and now a creditor. No. That was the first case. The first case was a third brother comes in. Now we're dealing with a creditor. A creditor comes in. The nato chelko shel echad mehen. So imagine, Stan, you and I are brothers, and we divide an estate. And then, Ken, as a creditor of our dad, comes in and says, takes my share away, and I don't have anything. Well, that seems pretty unfair, right? I mean, so the question is what do we say? Do we say that we have to do a new division, or do we say tough luck on David? Too bad. Too bad, so sad. You say the second sentence, of course, because that's where you get to keep the whole thing. So Rav Amar Batla Machlokes. No, Rav says no. That you can't. That the whole division is undone. Shmuel Amar Viter. Shmuel says no. That he's missed out on his inheritance. As Rashbam says, Viter Hifsid. The brother, meaning in this case me, loses ve'enu choser el achi v'klal, and I don't get to go to my other brother to stand and say, hey, I should be able to get half of what you have because I got all of my property was taken. The Rav Asi Amar, third opinion. Here we have a three-way machlokas. Noto revia bakarka. Actually, I get a quarter of the land. Revius b'mos. Now, can be or and. Here, the Rashbam understands it as or, and we'll see it inside. Or I can get a quarter of the money. Now, again, that means that you end up with 3/4 of what is owned, and I end up with 1/4. So let's take a look, and we'll understand why. So we've Rav Asi Amar, the next Rashbam. We're now 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines up from in the narrow lines of the Rashbam on Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph. And again, we are dealing with a situation where two brothers divide an estate. And we said that we're going to pretend that Stan and I are brothers. And then a creditor, Ken, comes in and takes away my entire share of the estate because he was a creditor of our dad, and now I want to get a share of what Stan got. And so we had three opinions. Rav said, of course, you redo the division. Shmuel said, no, tough luck. You did the division. What you owned was yours and not Stan's, David. And therefore, when your share got taken away, that's tough luck on you. And then the third opinion, Rav Asi says, no, I get a quarter of what Stan has, either in land or in money. Now we're looking at the Rashbam, again, 13 lines up. Rav Asi Amar, lo batla machlokes. Machalokas. We don't say that the transaction, the division got nullified, litol machsa, so that I should get half Michelik Achiv of my brother's share, that I should get half of Stan, Kirav, like Rav says, V'gam lo viter kishmuel. And similarly, Rav Asi says that we don't say that I get nothing the way Shmuel says, Legamri, completely. Elanoto Ravia. Rather, I get a quarter. Ravia karka misade achiv, dahainu chatzi chatzyav. I get half of my half. Oh, Revia yitain lo achiv mos. Or Stan could pay me a quarter of the money. Demutzi amarle, because Stan could say, and why does Stan get to pay me money instead of giving me real property? Because that's what we're talking about in terms of the inheritance. Because he could say, Ana havi masalikna le lebal chov bezuzeh. That he would, when Ken came and took away my land, Stan says, well, if he had come to me, I wouldn't have given him an inch of my land. I would have just paid him with money. And therefore, and he would have had to go away. Shahare lo nischayavlo avi ki im zuzi, because our father was only obligated to pay money. Nami zuze mishalimne, and you should have also paid the money. The time up. So now, what's the reason? Why does Rav Asi say that I only get a quarter? After all, maybe I should get a half. The time of Farj Lakame. We're going to explain it momentarily, but I'll tell you what it is right now. Rashbam tells us the Misafkale. He's unsure. Ikarav, Ikishmul. That basically he's not sure. Should we hold like Rav and make me and allow me to get half? Or should we hold like Shmuel and say that I get none? So let's split the difference, and I'll get a quarter. Umaman hamuta b'safek chokin, and money that we put aside that is subject to uncertainty. Sumchus has told us over and over again. We've seen that you divide it. Now again, we don't actually paskin like Sumchus, so don't expect that the halacha is going to be like Ravasi. But anyway, that is what we're going to say. Indeed, it seems like we'll see that the yes.
In civil law, in American civil law, the creditors get taken care of before the estate is divided.
That is correct. That is correct. So that the point is that this shouldn't happen in U.S. law. Now you raise a great point, because maybe this shouldn't happen in Jewish law either. And so that's what Tosfos.
I would think that the first that you proposed, that a new agreement should be set up.
100%. I agree. And by the way, that's the halacha. The halacha is that way. But Tosfos asks Stan's question of how in the world this situation come to be. So let's take a look. Top of Kuf Zion, Amud Aleph, first Tosfos, Uva Balchov. The Torah of Chelko shall echad mehen. So they came and took away part of it, one of theirs. The im tomar hech Torah kol Chelko shall echad mehen. How was it possible for Ken to only take my share? He should have had to take half from each of us. Hakulan chayavin lifroa chov avihen. Both Stan and I are obligated to pay the debt of our father. And so Ken should be taking half from each of us. Hamegio, that came to us as a result of our division of the property. We're going to have a whole discussion of inheritance in a couple of weeks. And so we should have. Why didn't it happen? Yatsa aleihem shtar chov b'chor nosem pishnayim. Indeed, when the firstborn gets his double share and now is obligated to contribute to pay off one of his father's debts, that means that the Bechor is obligated to pay double because he got double, right? He got double, so he's obligated to pay double. So why is it that that Ken was able to take all of my property and none of Stan's? Yesh lomar dahachi myri kigon da asa u apotiki. We're assuming that we're saying that there was an apotiki. And as a reminder, an apotiki is where I tell you that you either only have the right or this is the only asset that you have a claim to. And so as a result, when Stan and my father made the borrowed from Ken agreed that the only thing that he would take is the property that I ended up taking in the inheritance. The loka potiki hamakabel de ka'amar hasam she'enu yachol lasalko bezuze. And we're not talking about the kind of a potiki that we have seen back in Perach hamakabel in Bava Metzia, where the person who's the borrower has no right to pay money and thereby retain the object of the apotiki.
I thought the apotiki was when you give the court jurisdiction over certain liabilities.
No. I think you may be thinking of a
apotropos.
Well, an apotropos is administrator, but I think you're thinking of what you do for Shvius is
an otzer, like otzer beitin.
Yeah, well, but what's it called? That was the Rebbe established. Oh, I can't.
We'll get to
I
it.
can't
Let's
stand
go
it. All right, we'll go on and come to me, I'm sure. So here, even though over there in Bava Metzia, we say that an apotiki is sometimes something that where the creditor can only take the asset. Here we're allowing the payment of money because the imkain, if it was only accessible to the asset and not to any of the funds, well then Rav Asi amai noto revia b'mos. Why would Rav Asi say, as we saw just a moment ago, that that Stan could tell me that he could give me a quarter of money? Because that implies that money would have worked. So clearly here we're dealing where a creditor had the right to come and potentially take the property that I took, but we still had the right to give him money. And because I chose not to give him money, that's why we're going to have this whole machlokes. Because if I had given him money, well, then I would have a claim against Stan for half of the money that I had paid. Okay, so now we explain the three.
So you're saying we're saying the apotiki is assigned or designated usurping only the property from one of the sons and not the other?
Correct. Because look, so when Stan and my father borrowed the money from you, he told you that the field A was the only property that you were going to be able to collect from. And the field A is equal in value to the amount that you lent to our father. And so you're like, okay, that sounds like a reasonable deal. And then when Stan and I divide the fields, we say, you know what, let's divide it A and B. And we say, I say I'll take A. Stan say, great, I'll take B. And so because maybe A is near my property, near where I live, etc., whatever the reason is, I ended up taking only property A. So now when you come to collect, you have a special right to collect from property A. Now, I could have paid you money, is what Tosas is saying, but I didn't pay you money. I let you take the land. And so that's why we're going to have this three-way machlokes, because you've taken only my land, which you had a right to take and could not take land from Stan, so that's perfectly fine. And now I want Stan to give me a share of what he's got because I got nothing. So that's the story. So Rav Amar. So now we go back into the Gemara. 1, 2, 3,
Dude,
5.
you could have had you could have had an easier answer, I think. You could have said the Baal Chov comes and it's easier for him to take this property for whatever reason. It's closer to him to the Baal
No,
Chov.
but but then if that were the case, I would make him go to court, and he would have to sue both me and Stan, and I would bring Stan in, and then it wouldn't work. That wouldn't necessarily work. Although there are some Rishonim that I think say like you
The
can.
father didn't have a good estate attorney because he didn't set it up correctly.
Yeah.
He set it up, one son's getting in a collection, one son's getting the short end of the stick.
Correct. So, all right. So let's go through. So 1, 2, 3, 6 lines down. First word on the line. Rav Amar Batla Machlokes. Rav says that we actually just have to redivide because Kasavar, he thinks the following. Ha'achan shechalku yorshenhain. That even after we have divided our estates, we are like, we remain heirs, meaning that we remain obligated in each other's in the debts of the Yerusha, of the inheritance. So let's take a look in the Rashbam. Third line down in the medium wide lines of the Rashbam. Yorshin Havu. Torahs Yorshin Yesh Alehem. Lifroa Bain Kulan Chovas Avihen. They remain even after we've divided, and I've taken field A and Stan's taken field B. We remain jointly liable for the debts of our father. Demishum Chaluka Lo Istaluk Mikarkai Didhu Mibal Chov. That doesn't take away any ability of the Baal Chov, the avuom of their father, disvirale l'rav, that yesh breira, huvrar hadavar shezaka kol echa bechelak haroilo. That according to Rav, basically the piece that I get is the piece that I was always intended to have, and so as a result, it ends up being my Yerusha. Well, but if my Yerusha ends up being 0, well, then that can't be what I was supposed to have. V'nimsa delo lachu zeh mizeh klum. I didn't get anything from the inheritance. V'hua din le'inyan chazara b'yovel. And similarly, when it comes to the end of Yovel, when, according to some opinions, we would need that since the division of inheritance is really like a sale, we have to undo the entire sale transaction, reunite all of our pieces of property, and then redivide them. That we're like buyers and we have to return one to another when it comes to Yovel. But L'Rav, according to Rav, we don't say that. Ein machzirin. You don't have to do that. The kaven de yorshin havu, because we remain heirs. Hilkach maktis chalko yaxerlo. So as a result, Stan is going to have to give me 1/2 of what he has because I would have gotten nothing from an inheritance perspective. So that is the Rashbam's explanation of Rav.
So it doesn't hold like Rav then, according to this explanation, does not hold by the law of Yovel?
No, of course he holds up the law of Yovel. The point is that Yovel doesn't imply when heirs divide an inheritance. Right? Yovel applies if I buy your land. But if Stan and I are brothers, and he would be the older brother, so he gets a double share. So he gets 2/3 of our dad's property. I get 1/3 of our dad's property. And now, when Yovel comes, he stays on his 2/3 of the share because I didn't buy my 1/3 and he didn't buy his 2/3 from me. That was what our father clearly intended. Whatever it is, however we ended up dividing it, that's what our father intended, and therefore it's a fine transaction. On the other hand, there are some who say that the division between Stan and me is actually like a sale transaction. And since it's like a sale transaction, when Yovel comes, we get to undo that sale transaction and redivide the property. It's a little complicated. Rav's position makes so much more sense to me. Ushmuel Amar Viter. And Shmuel
So,
says, no.
but after Yovel, the division would be the same because it's the Bechor still gets the Pishnayim.
Yes, but not necessarily the same 2/3 of the property. Maybe I insist on a different 1/3. Maybe the value of my third has gone down. And so as a result, when I get a third now, my third is going to be larger than it was. Or maybe my third went up in value. And so Stan says, oh, I now get part of your third because now my 2/3 should include some of your land because the value of my land didn't go up as much. So there would be necessarily a different potential there would potentially be a different division. You're absolutely right. If everything remains the same, then of course they could leave everything the same. They could leave everything the same, but they don't have to leave everything the same because everything gets undone. But let's take a look at Shmuel's explanation. Shmuel Amar Viter. Shmuel says that David loses. Kasavar, because he thinks because we are purchasers of one another. And moreover, we are purchasers with no right of responsibility, no guarantee. So as a result, even though I have lost my property, tough luck on me. And so that is Shmuel's opinion. For Rav Asi, Misapkale. And Rav Asi says he's unsure. Are we heirs like Rav says, or are we buyers like Shmuel says? Hilkach notel revia bekarka or revia b'mos. And therefore, I get either a quarter in the land or a quarter in the money. Now, I will note here that Rashbam here explains this as possibly meaning a different explanation. And he cites his grandfather Rashi and says that maybe this is actually dealing with that you should understand noto revia bakarka u revia b'mos as meaning that I get 1/4 of land and 1/4 in money. So I end up with the right amount of money. And it's as if we split it, but Stan has the right to pay me for half of it. That would be a totally different explanation. The Rashbam does not like that explanation because in general, when we have two opinions and then a third opinion in the Gemara or in a Mishnah or in a Brisa, usually that third opinion splits between the two. And if we were to say that that I, as the losing brother, should get 1/4 in land and 1/4 in money, and then it's not really a split between Rav and Shmuel. It's really very much like Rav, who says that we undo it, except that half of it gets paid in money as opposed to in real property. So that's just the background. We're running a little long, so I want to make sure to move move us ahead. So
So in the end, according to that opinion, this person with the second brother would get half, not a quarter.
Yes, that's exactly right. And that's part of the reason that Rashbam doesn't like that interpretation, because that isn't a split in the middle of between Rav and Shmuel. So Amar Rav Papa, because if you take a look at the words of Ravasi, it seems like he's saying that there's uncertainty whether we hold like Rav or we hold like Shmuel, because he is using the language that Rav and Shmuel used in their explanation. So Amar Rav Papa, Hilchasa B'chol Hani Shmaita Mekamtsin, that the halacha in every one of these cases is that we take off a portion, that the division is a valid division, and we take off a portion. Meaning, if we go back to the prior case, remember the prior case was where a third brother came out of nowhere. So we're going to, the original division is not voided. And Amemar says, no, but la machlokas. We do nullify the original division, and therefore we're paskening like Rav. The hilchasa, but la machlokas. And the halacha is we follow Rav. The machlokas is negated. And Tosfos adds here, the hilchasa, but la machlokas, hakamashman kaimalan, last Tosfos on Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph. So we see from here that the yesh breira, that we do say yesh breira, mid the paskin and kirav, because we're holding like Rav. So you go see over there in Gittin where I give more on that. But it's interesting because often we think that we only will say yesh breira by a rabbinic issue and not by a biblical issue. But here it seems like we're saying yesh breira even by a biblical issue. Now, I don't have to interpret it that way, but the bottom line is that it does seem that we negate the overall transaction. So let's take a
Well,
look at
what's
the
the, just the, again, what's the Brera gets a little bit complicated sometimes. Yesh or Ein Brera.
correct.
And in this case,
So
you
here
also,
we would say yesh brera, meaning that when Stan and I divided, our father intended for us to have these pieces of property as an inheritance. But of course, he cannot intend for me to get nothing and for Stan to get everything. So as a result, when it turns out that you take away my entire inheritance, then it cannot be that I end up with nothing as an inheritance. And so as a result, we have to divide the piece that Stan has.
Mhm.
Okay, that's the yesh brera. As opposed to if we were to say ein brera, which means that Stan and I, when we divided, our father did not necessarily intend for us to get these particular portions, but rather it's us doing a bilateral transaction that results in it. Well, now when my piece gets taken away by you, Ken, it's tough luck on me. I and Stan negotiated that I would get this piece. And so it has nothing to do with our father.
Right.
And so as a result, I get nothing. I'm just a purchaser. And Stan didn't take on any guarantees in that sale transaction. Now, maybe I would have had the right
Insistent.
to insist on that. And that would be an interesting ha'ara on this. But the bottom line is we're assuming that I didn't insist on that, right? And so as a result, I would have no right to take anything of his. But again, bottom line, we paskin that that it is batla machlokas, and therefore we do in both the cases of the third brother coming out of nowhere and the case here of the Ken coming and taking away my property. In both cases, we do a new division to set up how we're going to inherit. Okay, so Tana Rabbanan, Shlosha Sheyardu. So we are we're at the two dots on Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph. Tana Rabbanan, Shlosha Sheyardu L'Shum. Three of us go, three judges come to appraise a piece of property. Echad Omer b'mana, one says that it's worth 100. Ushnayim Omer b'masayim, and two say that it's worth 200. So now, importantly, this is a court that's reaching a conclusion. Echad Omer b'masayim, Ushnayim Omer b'mana. Or you could have had the other way. One says it's worth 200, and two say it's worth 100. But where a mana is 100 zuz. So that just so that people have a sense. So the individual's opinion is negated when compared to the majority opinion. And Rashbam explains, if we take a look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines up, beginning of the line or end of the 8th line, Batal Yachid b'miuto, Kolomar, Batlu divrei hayachid, mipnei shehu hama'at. Right, we are going to negate the individual opinion because he's in the minority. Uksiv, and we have the pasuk in Shmos Parakov Gimel, Acharei Rabim Lahatos. We follow the majority. And now, what happens if it's more complicated? Now we get the rest of the this brisa that we're quoting. Echad Omer b'mana. One says that it's worth 100. Ve'echad Omer be'esrim, and one says that it's worth 20. Now, 20 that we're talking about is not the 20 of the 100, it's 20 sela or 80 zuz. So that's just important to understand. Or 80 dinar. Dinar and zuz are the same. So Echad Omer be'esrim, one says that it's worth 80. Ve'echad Omer b'shloshim, one says that it's 30 slaim, and each cell again is worth 4 zuz or 4 dinar, and so as a result, that's 120. And so now, and Rashbam helps us out with that math. And so now nidon b'mana. So in the end, the Tanakama of this brisa says that we're going to value it at 100. That makes a lot of sense, right? We have 3 views. We're going to do the average. Rabbi Eliezer, but Rabbi Tzadok Omer nidon b'tishim. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Tzadok, says, no, we're going to value it at 90. Acherim omrim osin shuma b'neihem. The others say that we're going to take a look at the difference between the top end and the bottom end, that's worth 40, right? 80 to 120 is a 40 difference. Osin shuma b'neihem, and we're going to calculate between them umashalshin, and we're going to divide it into 3. Now, Rashbam says, all right, well, what do you do now that you've divided it into 3? Well, the answer is you're going to add 1/3 to the lowest number. And let's take a look and we'll see that in the Rashbam. Okay, so, let's first go back and we'll explain the tzaddik dinar. Well, how come Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Tzadok says that we say 90, the tzaddik dinar, min hachamesh shloim, because we remember that we had 3 different opinions. One says 20 sela, one says 25 sela, and one says 30 sela. So min hachamesh shloim sheyesh ben shnayim hapachusin. If you take the 5 difference, or alternatively the 20 zuz difference that we have between the 2 lowest numbers. So one of us said 80, one said 100. So you take a look at that, and we loken chachatzi. We do that. We half that. Dahainu yud dinarim, which is 10 dinarim or 10 zuzim. So umosifin al shel shmonim, and we add that to the 80. So the bottom line is what we're doing is the following: is we have 3 different opinions. Ken says 80. I say 100. Stan says 120. So we're going to take Ken and my opinions, which are the lowest 2, and we're going to, no, not the lowest and the highest, the lowest and the middle, right, and say, let's average those 2. That's what Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Tzadok says. Okay, so we're going to focus on the low end and average the 2. And then, Osin Shuma Beinenu Mishalshin, Kolomar, Choshun Bekama Chalukin. How much is the overall division? Dahainu arbain dinar, right? It's 40 dinar is the difference between Ken's 80 and Stan's 120. Sheyesh bishloshim yoser mioto she'amar esrim, which is again the amount of the difference between the one who said 30 sela and the one who said 20 sela. That there's a 40 dinar difference. Umeotan arbain, and from that 10, 40,
10 between 30 and 20 is 10, right?
10, it's 10 sela, but 40 zuz or dinar. It's important to remember the exchange rate here. So we're dealing with a 40 difference in dinar. So umeotan arbain, from that 40 dinar difference, tidon b'shlish, we'll calculate 1/3. Dahainu shlosha asar dinar ushlish, which is 13 1/3 dinar. And we'll add that, al shmonim, we'll add that to the 80, and v'taimim first l'kamei, and we're going to explain why in the moment. So the bottom line is that the 3 different opinions that we have is, one says that when we have 80, 100, and 120, one says we value it at 100, one says that we value it at 90, and one says that we value it at 93 1/3. So manda amar nidon b'mana, one who says that we do it at 100, milsa mitziyasa. We simply do the median, the average, the middle. Now, what's not clear here is, what do we mean by the middle? And I'll tell you the answer in the end, right? The answer that we paskin in Shulchan Aruch is actually, what we mean is you ignore the middle amount, and we take the 2 extremes and we average the 2 of them. So for example, if it would have been 90, 100, and 130,
90, 100, and 130.
Okay, we would end up with 110 as the value.
Right.
Very interesting. But that's in fact, again, that's what the Shulchan Aruch says in terms of how when a court comes to this kind of conclusion, that's how they should evaluate. So basically, the middle person gets completely ignored. Very interesting conclusion that the halacha reaches. In any event, so that's the first opinion. We look at the average. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Tzadok Omer, Nidum Betishim. He says that we look at 90. And Kasavar, because he's thinking, Ha'ara, this land, as we turn to Kuf Zayin Amabet, Tishin Shava, really it's worth 90. V'haidika Amar Esrim, and the reason that the person said that it was worth 80, the Katai Asar Lachareha, because he made a mistake by 10 too low. V'haidika Amar Mana, and the one who said 100, Katai Asar Lekame, he made a mistake that was 10 too high. 1 second. But if you're going to do that and just focus on two people and say that each of them made a small mistake and the third person made a big mistake, well, then adarabba, why not say that it's worth 110? And say that the one who said 100 said it was 10 too little. And the one who said 30 said it was 10 too high. And say, do that. Why not do it that way? So nakatmiyas trey kamai biyadak. No, because look, you have to do the first two ones. They never exceed 100. And Rashbam explains basically that let's take a look in the Rashbam. Well, all right, I'm going to just do this Rashbam outside. That the Rashbam basically explains that the concept here is tafasta meruba lo tafasta. That there's an idea that when you try to grab too much of something, you're not going to be able to grab it. It's in a colloquial sense. We used to say in the antitrust business that pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. Meaning, if you're too piggy, well, then you're going to lose out and you won't get anything. I remember that one time we were coming. Well, whatever. Never mind. It's not. If you grab, this is true. If you try to grab too much, if you try to grab too much candy out of a bowl, you'll end up getting nothing. Exactly. And so you're better off trying to take a more modest amount. So as a result, that's the basis for saying we're going to follow the 80 and the 100 to say that it's worth 90 and not to follow the 100 and the 120 and say it's worth 110. Acherim omrim, others say, so again, the others say that it's 93. Osin shuma b'nei mushalshin, and you divide the difference between 80 and 120 into thirds, and you add that third to the bottom amount. Kasavrig hi ara tishnu tlasa v'tilta shavya, and because really the land is worth 93 and a third. Hi deka amar esrim, the one who said that it was worth 80 katai tlesar. He utilta lachore. He made a 13 and 1/3 mistake. V'hai deka amar mana, and the one who said 100 katai tlesar v'tilta lekame. He also would have made a mistake of 13 and a third, meaning that he was thinking that it was worth 106 and 2/3. Ubedinhu delema tvei, and really he was going to say more. But that which he chose not to say the higher amount, that's because saber mistoi dekamitfina kulehai. He didn't want to make such a big difference with his friend, with the first guy, because the first guy said 80. So now the second guy is like, well, I thought it was 106 and a third, 106 and 2/3, but I'm not going to say that big because I don't want to make it such a big difference. I'll split my difference down the middle. And so therefore he's going to say, 100. So adarabba, once again, if you're using that logic, why are you again focusing on the two smaller amounts? Ha'ara meo tleser v'tilta shavya. Why not say that the land is really worth 113 and a third, right? Hi deka'amar mana katoi tleser v'tilta lacho, right? That really the one who said 100 was 13 and a third too low, and the one behind the Kamar Shloshim Toy Tleser Vatilta Lakame, and the one that said 120 really was going to say 126 and 2/3, but he cut his difference in half because he didn't want to be so extreme. Ubedinhu de Kamar Tvei, he was going to say even more, and Savra Mistoi de Kamitfina Kulehai Achavarai, and he didn't want to disagree so much with his friend. And so as a result, why not say that? So the answer is nakod mias trey kamai biyadah. No, because look again, we're going to focus on the first two judges, umitoris meya lo mafkile, and neither of them exceed 100. And so as a result, we're going to focus on them. And again, the same concept of tafasta meruba lo tafasta. All right, so Amarav Huna Hilchasa Ka'acherim. The halacha is like the acherim, meaning that it's like this view that says that it's really worth 93 and a third. Rav Ashi says, what are you talking about? this reasoning is barely understandable. Hilchos Abdin and Gavasayu, are we going to say that the halachas like them? Not only that, a very similar story happened. Tanu Dayani Gola, the judges in the diaspora said, Osin Shuma Beineim Mishalshin, that in fact we calculate the difference between them by a third, and therefore we follow the 93 and a third. Amar Rav Huna, and Rav Huna said, Hilchos Dayani Gola, the Hilchos is like them. Amar Rav Ashi said, Time of the Gola? Lo Yadinan. We don't understand that right reasoning. Hilchos Abdinan Kavasayo. Are we going to make the halacha like them? And again, indeed, in the Shulchan Aruch, we average the high and the low. And so as a result, when it's 80, 100, but it could be 80, 119, and 120, and we would still say 100. It could be 80, 81, and 120, and we would still say 100 because we average the high and the low. And the Gemara, the halakha gives the example of 90, 100, and 130, and says that the halakha is that we say it's 110, the average of 90 and 130. Okay, so the last Mishnah of our
we're saying it's 93 and a third, though, right?
No, that was the proposed halakha, but in each case, Rav Ashi responded that how could we follow that? How could that be the halacha when we don't really understand the reasoning? The reasoning doesn't make as much sense as the other approaches. And in fact, like I said, I went and looked in Shulchan Aruch, and according to the Shulchan Aruch, we say that if it's 90, 100, and 130, we average the high and the low, and we look, and it would be 110. And so certainly in this case, where it's 80, 100, and 120, we would follow the middle one, and we would say it's worth 100. Okay. If I tell you that I'm going to sell you half of a field, so we're going to we estimate between them, or the quality is between them. So Rashbam it tells us that we're going to explain this in the Gemara. So it's not clear. I understand it's not clear. We'll figure out in the Gemara. And he gets half the field. If I say I'm going to sell you my southern half, so again, we're going to figure out the estimate. And he takes the southern half. So and the seller accepts that the buyer is going to get a space for a fence, charitz uben charitz, a trench and a narrow trench, charitz, and how wide is the trench? Shisha tefachim. There's got to be at least 6 tefachim. Uben charitz, and a narrow trench, shlosha tefachim. So basically 9 tefachim in addition to the space for the fence. So Amar Rabbi Chia Bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan Lokeach Noto Kacha Shabo, that we focus on the square footage, and in the case of the getting half, the buyer gets the worst half of the field. So Amar Le Rabbi Chia Bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan V'ha'anan Mashmina Mishamnin Beinehen Tanan. But 1 second, it says that we again, the quality falls between them. So what does that mean by the quality falls between them? So Amar Le, Rabbi Yochanan said to Rabbi Chia Bar Abba, Ada Achlat Kavnaisa Bevavel, that Targimna Miseifa, that I'm sorry, Ada Achlat Kafanya Bevavel, that while you've been eating dates in Bavel, Targimna B'Seifa, we understood this Mishnah by focusing on the second clause of the Mishnah, the Katani Seifa, because the second clause says, Chetzia B'Daram Ani Mocher Lach, that if I sell you the half in the southern half, Mishamnin B'Nehen, we again figure out the quality between them, the Notel Chetzia B'Daram, and he gets half in the southern half. So V'amai Mishamnin B'Nehem, why would there be any kind of quality evaluation? He told him he was going to get the bottom, the southern half. So what is that? What's the evaluation going on? Rather, it's all about the value of the property, meaning hachanami lidmei. And here too, it means the value of the property. So therefore, what are we saying? We're saying the following. If I tell you I'm going to sell you half the field, so then the way we are going to divide the field is not based on square footage, but it's based on value. And so it could be that Stan gets a majority of the field, or it could be that Stan gets a minority of the field. The key is that it's going to be the same value. And similarly, when I say to Stan that I'm selling him the southern half of my field, it does not mean the southern half exactly and precisely, but rather it means a half that is on the southern side. So as a result, if the southern half is worth more, he's going to get less land. If the southern half is worth less, he's going to get more land. And if the property is completely equal, well, then of course he'll get the exact same amount. And so we'll pick up, God willing, from there.
From what point? Where are
God
we now?
willing, tomorrow.
Where are we exactly now?
We're at the 2 dots at the bottom of Kozayin Amud Bet, excuse me.
Isn't there a discussion in the Gemara elsewhere about the purchase of land depending on the idid, ziburit, and so forth? Why doesn't that enter in here?
I think that that's not the purchase of land, but rather a creditor collecting. A creditor collecting is going to focus on whether he can collect from the Edis, the Boris, or the Baininus. But here we're going to we're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on and of course the other piece is and there also could be, if I tell you that I'm selling you a property and I don't tell you which property, that we might run into that question as to which of the properties I'm selling. But here I have given a specification. In particular, I've said half. And so as a result, the definition of half is from a monetary perspective. And that's how the Gemara is understanding our Mishnah. All right. We'll pick up, God willing, from there tomorrow. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.